All right, hi everybody, it's Jack, and let's just get to the point. Today's lesson, refeeds for fat loss. So I'm just gonna get right into this one. I've used refeeds for well over a decade at this point. I use them in all my fat loss challenges. I use them in all my fat loss clients. They are incredibly effective for sustained long-term fat loss and making the dieting process easier. And they are, weirdly enough, almost unknown. I don't hear about them outside of the competitive bodybuilding world, really. Or you hear about them and it's a cheat day, but people don't understand why they're cheating. It's a very bastardized concept. So the refeed, what are we talking about with a refeed? What exactly is a refeed? So the first coach I learned this from was Scott Abel, fantastic bodybuilding coach, just all-around coach, in fact. He was probably more famous maybe 10, 15 years ago. He's probably sort of almost retired today from the internet. But Scott Abel, he's been around a long time, since the 1980s. And he came up with this concept of using what he called a spike meal or a spike day of higher calorie eating for metabolic relief, metabolic physiological relief. Meaning what? Meaning that we know that when we diet for fat loss, so you're in a deficit, you are dropping body fat, you are under eating essentially, that's what being in a deficit is, metabolism slows down, right? So we have this compensatory metabolic slowdown effect. And this is well known in the scientific literature. This is not something that's bro observation, very well known in all the obesity research. Anyone that studied fat loss, weight loss in the last 40 years, this happens. Your metabolism, going back even to the Minnesota starvation study, your metabolic rate, let's say your TDEE, let's say you start off, it's at 3,000 calories a day, you diet, eventually that drops down to 2,500, and then maybe eventually it approaches 2,000, and your basal metabolic rate, your BMR, let's say that starts out at, let's use an easy number, 2,000. Now that starts to drop down as well. Maybe that's now 1,700, potentially even lower. And metabolism is slowing down. Why is metabolism slowing down? Well, for obvious reasons, we're under eating, but there's a slowdown in a whole bunch of hormones. Thyroid hormone, testosterone, even dopamine. Anyone that's ever dieted and life starts to become not very enjoyable. You have a reduction, I'll go over here to this side. There's a reduction in NEAT, non-exercise active thermogenesis. So you start fidgeting less, you start moving around more, you sit, you're kind of like Felix the cat. All this stuff happens when you diet. I'm writing this out just for the sake of writing it out, thermogenesis. So I still know how to spell. So all this stuff goes down. So what does the spike day / refeed do? It does a bunch of things. When you have a day of higher calorie eating, or let's say you've been on a diet of, again, I'll use just easy numbers. You've been on a diet, you're at 2,500 calories, and then suddenly you go all the way up to say 5,000 calories, your metabolic rate goes up, metabolism goes up. There's a temporary increase in hormones. There's certainly an increase psychologically in enjoyment. There's an increase in overall energy. And this spike day, this refeed day, today they get called cheat days, but this refeed day, I call them refeed days. This refeed day takes metabolism that's slowing down, let's say on the sloped line, and it bumps it back up. And then you start to slow down again, and let's say a week later, 10 days later, you have another refeed day, and it bumps it back up. So the metabolic slowdown gets literally slowed down, and these temporary spikes in metabolism allow you to keep losing body fat, and by way of increasing metabolism, you also are able to make your deficit more effective. So instead of hitting, let's say, like a plateau of, again, let's just say 2,500 calories, where you think like, okay, my weight loss was going down and down, it just kind of stopped. What do I do? Take a cheat day / refeed day / spike day. Metabolism goes back up. There will always be a temporary increase in body weight because of food, If you eat a bunch of food, you got more food in your gut, that's weight. In terms of body water and water retention, there may be very, very short-term labial fat gain. But as you go back to your deficit the following day, post-refeed day, weight will be higher, body will be higher, but it will start to drop off, and then your weight will drop off. It will spike up, but then it'll drop down lower to where it was before. And what will happen is you'll experience something called, I'll write this down here, called the Whoosh Effect. So credit to Lyle McDonald for both this concept and also his work on refeed days or diet breaks. But the whoosh will happen, and this is a hypothesized mechanism where your water retention and specifically your fat cells, as they begin to basically be burned, the fat in them is being used for energy, they'll temporarily refill with water, and you'll kind of be like, you have a watery physique, be holding a lot of water, your weight will be up, and then you'll have this, so your weight's kind of up, and you're like, oh my God, I gained all the weight back. You don't. There's this whoosh effect where the weight drops off pretty dramatically. So you can have literally a day, especially a day post-refeed, let's say your body weight has dropped to 190, you have your refeed day, it spikes back up to 195, everyone freaks out. Everyone freaks out the first time they do a refeed. Because your weight goes up, it might go up 3, 4, 5 pounds even, but then over the course of 3 to 4 days, it starts to drop down. Let's just say it goes from 195, then it's 194, then 193. You're like, oh, okay, this isn't so bad. And then on day, usually like 3 or 4 days later, maybe you're at 192, and then there's a big drop, oftentimes of like 2, even 3 pounds. So you're peeing a lot, you go to the bathroom, and suddenly you drop down, and now you're at 190, 189. Oh wow, you just broke through the plateau. And then the process, now you're at 180 now, so now your sticking point, let's say previously, it was 190 to 191. Now it's 189, 188, something like that. So you have this big whoosh happen where the weight will drop off over the course of 24, 48 hours. You're at a lower body weight than you were before in terms of the plateau you had reached, and the refeed worked. The refeed worked, and it was incredibly effective. Now you can keep dieting. So what goes into a refeed day? Is it just an all-you-can-eat day? Eat everything you want. Some coaches might do it that way. I don't do it that way. I have various strategies for refeed days. And in terms of when I use them, when do you start doing them in a diet, it is specific. So let's kind of talk about that. Let me wipe off some of this, and we'll talk about that. When do you actually have a refeed day? Do they start at the beginning of the diet? Do you wait a certain amount of time? When do you eat? Let's talk about that. So your refeed, you have a few options for refeeds. You can do, let's say, all day, which typically I will say is like 12 hours. So someone, they wake up on, let's say Saturday's a refeed, from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. you'll be eating. Why 12 hours? Why not 16 hours? I say 12 hours because regardless of, for all my clients, whether they're trying to lose body fat or even gain weight, I like to always follow a 12-12 eating schedule. So you eat half the day, you eat half the day, keeps metabolism running well, your digestive system is always able to clear itself out. So it'd be all day, 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. You can do refeed that way. Sometimes some clients, let's say, maybe they're obese, maybe they are, some people lose body fat faster than others. There's a very big genetic component to fat loss and obesity. Maybe it might be a refeed meal. So, for people, they have a lot of weight to lose. They don't need a whole day to replenish themselves. It might just be one meal. And that might be done like twice a week, spaced out maybe 4 days apart, roughly. Something like that, 4 or 5 days approximate. And then for the other clients, from some clients might be having a refeed every 7 to 10 days. But what are we eating on refeed day? So for the majority of people, I'd say 80% of the time, 90% of the time, so let's say 90-10. 90% of the time, power distribution, your refeed day is going to be high carbohydrate, very high carbohydrate. It's going to be low protein. And now when I say low protein, I don't mean no protein. I just mean protein's not really a priority. Low protein and actually low fat as well. So it'd be, in terms of, if we were to go by macros and percentage, it'd be about at least 60% carbohydrate, and then roughly 20-20 parity between protein and fat. Why such high carbs? Like, why? I thought carbs make you fat. No, carbohydrates don't make you fat. Eating high carbs, which raises insulin and then leads to fatty acids being stored as fat, that's what makes you fat. And obviously that's calorie surplus. Carbohydrates by themselves, if you were to eat a pure carbohydrate diet, carbohydrates, again, I'll reiterate, by themselves are very difficult to convert into body fat. What they will do is they will increase metabolism substantially, and they get burned for energy. And if you have been dieting and you are glycogen depleted, so the glycogen in your muscles and your liver, you've used all up, and that by itself, between the muscles and the liver, you're looking at, let's say, anywhere from, let's say, like 400 to 600 plus grams of glycogen. Refueling that glycogen by itself, that's where some of the weight gain is going to come from. But refueling that, that will be replenished by the high carbohydrate stores. And then you have the added energy effect. That's what is making metabolism go up. So like I said, 90% of the time, my refeed days are high carbohydrate. 20% protein fat, 60% carbohydrates. And where are the carbs coming from? I prefer both simple and complex carbohydrates. I don't really worry about starches on this day. I don't tell people to worry about starches. So simple and complex carbs. And the one thing I will advise against is having, let's say, like straight sugar, just because you could do that, but eating tons of honey might not be that satisfying. But just, again, someone that's been dieting, let's say, for 3 or 4 months, they want to eat a lot of different foods. So you could have pastries, you can have bread. This is terrible chicken scratch, whatever. Yeah, you can have pasta. I just want a day of high carb eating and follow the macro split approximately. And let's get glycogen refueled, let's get your metabolism up. And like I said, body will go up, but it will definitely come back down. And that's what the refeed day will typically look like for the majority of the time. Okay, so that's the refeed day. When do you do the refeed day? That's a big question. Well, when do you do this? Oh, wow, it sounds amazing when I do this. So you don't do this right away. This is not something that you do usually in the first week. Sometimes, if you're in a very sharp deficit, but with an individual client, I don't have someone do this immediately. What you want to do is you want to diet typically for around 10 days. Okay? And you want to see minimum around 3 to 4 pounds of weight loss, okay? Now, this doesn't mean this is all pure fat. Someone's gonna point out, well, you're physiologically limited to losing 2 pounds a week, so that couldn't all be fat. I'm like, I know. But the first week you start a diet, assuming that your numbers are dialed in, you've calculated out your metabolism, your BMR, your TDE, you've got your meal set up, like you actually did the math, you did your homework, you did the math, awesome, it's working. Some of the weight that's lost, a lot of it's gonna be water. So you have a water weight loss. If you're following the meal plan, you're defecating more regularly. Some of it's just going to be sort of food mass. It's not sitting in the gut. And then some of it, of course, hopefully a majority of it is actual fat. So we're going to wait for about 10 days. So let's, using easy numbers, let's say we've gone from 200 down to 196. Okay, that's just 4 pounds even. And then we can elect to have a refeed day based on how we are feeling. So this is also there's a subjective psychological quality of life component to this. If you're following the diet and your energy in the first week and a half is good, so energy's up, yet you're not feeling the deficit yet, workouts are still good, you're not feeling any kind of fatigue yet, or anyone that's dieted hard knows exactly what I'm talking about, we're just tired. If energy's going up and that's feeling good, this is all up, I might say to wait. Let's push out the first refeed to 14 days. And after 2 weeks of straight dieting, all right, regardless of how you're feeling, I'm probably gonna say let's have the refeed. And at that point, let's say you're down to maybe 185, 184. Yes, the weight's gonna go back up, but it'll drop back down again as soon as we have that whoosh effect, kick in and the body water gets released. So usually it's about 10 to 14 days. You assess how someone's feeling, you elect to have a refeed. Now in some cases, with very dramatic cuts from the very beginning, let's say you start off a diet and you are starting it off at like a 1,000 calorie deficit from the very first week, you could have your refeed within 7 days, 7 days later. You could do that. I've done that very successfully in my fat loss groups multiple times for hundreds and hundreds of guys at this point. The bigger the deficit, the sooner you're going to need to refeed. You could do that. Now, in some cases, let's say someone is very obese. They have 100+ pounds to lose, okay? So 100+ pounds, maybe they're 300+ pounds, maybe they're 400+ pounds. They're big, right? What do you do for those people? Do they need a refeed? Yeah, you can still refeed for obese clients. What you'll want to do though is go to this strategy. Wait out that refeed until the person needs it, because this person, this morbidly obese person, they have so much stored energy on their body, they can diet for quite a while before they get depleted. So that person, I might push that out maybe to like the 3-week mark. And depending upon what their issues are psychologically related with food, their relationship with food, I might not do a refeed day at all. This might be the type of person where it's more appropriate to have refeed meals maybe twice a week for the first, maybe let's say 1 to 2 months. And then as they start dropping more weight, then maybe you can introduce a refeed strategy if they feel comfortable with it. Since if this is someone that is, if you're dealing with an obese individual where they have uncontrolled eating, they binge out, this might not be the best strategy. You just have to make that determination as a coach, professionally, whether you think it'll work for them and what you know about them in that relationship. But for people who are not morbidly obese, for people who are more closer to being normal body weight, healthy body weight, the refeed strategy for most people will work extremely well. But that's what the refeeds look like. And like I said, you can use this to keep dieting going for, putting numbers anywhere, 3, 4, 5. If you're a natural competitor, you're dieting for a bodybuilding show, maybe you're dieting for 6 months, this will change your life. Although I assume if you're an experienced competitor, you already know about this. But if you don't know about this, this will be absolutely life-changing doing refeeds. And this is how you can get super ripped, lean, and literally not die in the process of trying to get there. But that's what refeeds look like. If you guys have any questions about them at all, this is all free form, just off the top of my mind. Post up in the comments. Remember to like and subscribe to the channel, and I will talk to you all again. Oh, you know what? And last thing, what about women? Refeeds work equally well for both men and women. All right, talk to you all again.